Hello, and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, and I'm here to talk to everyday superheroes helping nonprofits using technology. Today, I'm joined again by Peter Genuardi. Peter joined us last week, and we had so much to cover that I asked him to join back again to continue. Let's call this part two, basically, of the podcast. So many more topics to talk about, as the theme is how to develop teams that deliver solutions to nonprofits. Peter, welcome to the show.
Hey, Alexander, thanks for having me back. It's great to be with you again today.
All right, so let's jump straight into it again because we got a few topics to get covered that we just didn't have the time for. I'm excited to talk about it. So let's hit the first one, which is about trust and control. And we did discuss in the past episode a bit about micromanagers versus managers who let their staff work more autonomously. And because I'm more of a person that loves talking about outcomes as opposed to measuring the inputs, I'm curious to know, have you seen or what have you seen in terms of what kind of different outcomes do you get when working with a micromanager, someone who really pays attention to every hour that an employee spends and kind of looks over the shoulder of that employee versus a manager that says, we're going to hire the best team and we trust them to do the right job. We don't need to follow what they're doing every second of the day because we know that they're going to create great outcomes.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we can all say that very few of us, and I've only met a handful of people in my life who were really good performers at their job and had good satisfaction that really wanted to be micromanaged, right? The vast majority of us, and certainly no A player, not that I'm an A player, I might be, but, I would say that no A player ever wants to be micromanaged. I think that, the impact on the quality of work sometimes, is huge when people feel like they're being micromanaged. So on an individual project basis, where we're trying to do something in the technical realm, where our solutions need to be terribly precise, if not perfect, there's this tendency that managers have to really overstep and lean in and be very precise with exactly how they want things to be done and exactly what the result is. And so the impact, the worker, right? If you've assigned me a project, is that sure, we might get one project done and it might be perfect and all the data go in all the right places. But at the end of the day, over time, that's going to wear down, certainly for me, on my job satisfaction, on the morale in the workplace. And so, I feel like we as managers have a challenge, right? We need to be able to hire fully formed adults, people who can communicate, express their needs, seek help when they need it, and also people who are competent in what the job is. So if we assign somebody a job, it's incumbent on us to make sure that we're really putting people in roles where they can be successful based on their competency. But when we can do that, right? When we can hire fully formed adults and assign them projects where they are significantly competent, that creates some instant trust. And so when trust in organizations, especially technical organizations, is high, I feel like we can let control go. And so as a manager, I'd much prefer to hire an engineer, as a very good example, who is really excited to go build the solution herself, right? I want her to be able to say, I understand that the system must do A, B, and C. Let me work on the technical details. We'll come back. We'll make sure it passes all of the QA and it does what you want. But I have the freedom to create that technical solution, again, in compliance with all the standards that we expect for security and code excellence and that sort of thing. But giving somebody like that freedom really, one, gets a great result more often than not. And then two, also increases the morale and increases that person's excitement about their work and certainly increases their enthusiasm to take on more projects. That's kind of what my experience has been. Have you seen similar things?
I have, in the sense that I'm trying to think of a scenario where a micromanager was a good thing. Has there ever been, based on your experience, a moment where you said, "Yeah, we need a micromanager for this," or is it always the case in every case where hire the best talent you can and let them do the thing they're really good at?
The one place where I would actually say that a micromanager is critical, where are areas where there are very limited opportunities for mistakes. Okay, so the vast majority of computer code that we make or software systems that we build, they're not saving lives, right? But if you're on the operating table, you want a micromanager to be supervising the staff that performs that surgery. Similarly, I think in the tech world, the places where I feel like we need to absolutely micromanage at least the quality assurance testing of things that we do is really around security and privacy. one, the privacy, because we owe it to the people that we're serving with the technology that we build, especially when our mission is progressive in nature and we're trying to make the world a better place. But also in terms of ensuring that our systems are completely and completely is a real big word, but as close to ironclad secure as possible. And so I think even in that situation, it's possible to say that I want that engineer, I want her to still have the ability to go build that security system. I want her to handle all of the SSL secure certificate implementation. And maybe when it comes to the QA, we lean in and we micromanage the heck out of checking every single thing that we can to ensure that the system complies with the highest levels of security. But it's hard for me to identify an entire software development project where end to end, complete, micromanaging of every requirement, every code technique, every detail really pays off.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think you're right. Those are maybe some short or some precise use cases where it could be important, but generally, it is probably a good idea to avoid a micromanager. I'm also curious to know, because of course, the past couple of years we've been working mostly from home. In terms of the control and managing your staff, there obviously has to be a certain amount of leeway and trust in knowing that your employees are working remotely and they're still working and they're not, in the fridge or going to appointments without notifying people. Have you noticed that there's a difference in the outcome again of remote working versus being at the office and where you can keep an eye on them?
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about it before you just asked me, but I think that over the last couple of years, as I've been managing people who work primarily remotely, thanks to the pandemic, it makes more clear to me where people are in need of more support or less to get their job done. I feel like, again, I keep coming back to this. When we can hire fully formed adults who have competency in their job, we can expect things from them like they're going to do the projects assigned to them on a certain schedule, on a certain budget, at a certain quality. And I'd say over the last couple of years, the people on my teams who have been able to do that have really emerged and stepped way up, and we can see what they're doing. I would say that they're terrifically successful, and that's especially when I focus on measuring them on their outcomes. So I'm not measuring John or Susan based on how much time they're sitting in their seat, but really it requires me as a manager to focus on them getting the job done, making sure that it passes all of our QA checks, and make sure that it makes the end client happy. I would say that there are probably a handful of people on some of the teams that I work with where I've been able to see that they actually perform much better when they are closely supervised, where they sit in a seat from 8 to 5, 10 to 6, 10 to 2, whatever their job is. And they're working around people and they're supervised, and that kind of office environment compels them to be at their seat doing their best work. Um, and I would say that that's the minority. Certainly, there are accommodations we can make to support people by providing them with regular check-ins or making sure that they're doing well, checking in with them on Slack and setting up regular meetings to one, review their work, two, connect with other people on the team. But yeah, I think as we've had more people work from home, as we've tried to focus on outcomes, we've been able to see a lot of people step up. And I think it's really more of a small handful of people who need the support of constant check-ins, or that more, dare I say, rigid guidance where we say, okay, great, you're going to be online from 9 to 5, and we're going to check in these 2 times during the day. And that, to me, is more supportive from my perspective as a manager, right? I want to give people what they need to be successful and let them be successful. It's not what I would say I've seen from other managers, this perspective that if you're not online and constant, and your Slack light is not the right color, and you're not online all day long, and I can't check in on you, you can't possibly be doing your job right. It's really that perspective that we need to support people in a way that helps them be successful. It's interesting. I'll just tell one quick story here, and that is during the pandemic, I heard a CEO talking a little bit, and he was asked, "Hey, can we make our summers? Can we get summer Fridays and let everybody go at 3 o'clock?" And it was really interesting to me because, one, he was reticent because he thought, people have just been slacking off. It was his assumption that people since the beginning of the pandemic have been slacking off. And so he actually said, no, isn't that what they've been doing for this last, 18 months? And so I was really surprised to see that from his perspective, productivity was measured in terms of time at the desk. And so there was no way we could give people some kind of flexibility and a little bit of a gift to make their lives better, because his assumption was when people aren't being watched, they're just going to slack off anyway. And so haven't we been accepting lower productivity all this time? It was really fascinating to see that perspective.
I think the key is hiring, like you said, fully formed, mature adults. If people are driven by what they want to do, they shouldn't need to be micromanaged. They shouldn't be needed to be measured in terms of their how much time they spend in front of the computer versus Slack or whatever. I think offering a hybrid model, though, is a good idea because there are some people who work just better at an office. Just like sometimes you might have a home gym that you never use because it's always there, always accessible, versus going to the gym. It kind of puts you in that frame of mind to say, okay, I'm at the gym, therefore I need to work out, or I'm at the office, therefore I need to work. There are some individuals that need that kind of structure and they work better in that environment. And there's some more like myself who I've been working remotely since before the pandemic, don't need that kind of structure. And I like that fluid flexibility to say, oh, I want to work, from these hours at this moment, but I might work till 10 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night on a particular day, just because that works better with my rhythm. So I think having the ability or the choice for employees to be able to say, for those that want to go in, can go in, for those that don't. And have that trust to say, regardless of whatever mechanism you choose, you'll be fine. Like you are treated like an adult to be able to make that choice and then live with those results.
Yeah, I would say one more thing on that topic, and I really like your perspective. I would say that there are a number of people that I've worked with who are now managers who were not managers before the pandemic. And so, as managers, they've had to develop a lot of skills that they need to support the team that works for them in the pandemic era. And so, to them, I give a few pieces of advice, and I certainly say, look, first of all, it involves having a good conversation and constant conversation with the people who work on your teams, right? We need to be able to ask people how they're doing, check back in, see how things are working, and adjust whatever perhaps their assignments are or their work arrangement is. What that really does is allow them to work to establish trust, right? The more I talk to the people that work for me on teams, the more we have a good conversation. We're sharing risk, we're sharing reward. And that's really something that builds that strong relationship that when something goes sideways, I can reach out to that individual and talk to them in a more direct, frank, and open manner, and it's more likely that I'll get a good result. I feel like the strength of that relationship, the depth of that relationship, really becomes important. And certainly, as you've suggested, in this quasi-pandemic era where a lot of people are still working remotely, it becomes even more important because we're not, going to lunch, we're not meeting up with people at the pub after work, we're not going to we're not taking a run at lunch together and that sort of thing. So I really appreciate your perspective as we think about how to manage our teams and how to let people grow with independence as we manage them in these virtual environments.
So let's talk a bit about burnout, preventing burnout, because there's an element of it keeping in track of the work-life balance. And I think there's an element of working from home where, you don't have travel time, there's no commuting, there's no traffic to get to work. So you gain back whatever hours you lost during that time. So I think we're in a place now where people are able to at least have the ability of having a better work-life balance, that they're balancing their personal life with their work life. Have you noticed anything about that in that topic?
I think that let me just first say I'm the worst person for you to interview on this topic. I feel like I have tried tons of techniques over the years to limit how much I work and really make sure that I'm devoting energy to myself, to my family and friends, and to my work. And I've got to be honest, I've never felt like I was truly successful. I think that in this new era, you make some really good points in that the time we've lost in commuting seems to be time we've traded off to do more work. I think that the challenge really becomes for us is setting good boundaries. But I also think that the company culture and the team culture has a lot to do with helping people avoid burnout, especially now when it's tempting to roll out of bed at 6:30, get started, and then I look up and it's 6:30 p.m. I think team culture really, and it comes from the top, has to be established so that we say, great, the expectations are that let's be clear, the expectations are that you work X number of hours a day or per week. For many companies that are agency focused, those hours contribute to the billables that they need to get in to make sure they hit their financial targets. Um, But I feel like as team members, we need to be able to support each other and come up with a common language where we can say, "Hey, Alexander, I noticed you've been, putting in 12 hours a day for the last 3 weeks. Don't you want to take some time to relax? Or when can we help you identify a time when you can take a break?" So whether that means that you work 6 hours a day for the next week or two, right? We've given you that opportunity to take that work and that time back onto your plate and dedicate it to the things that make you feel whole and healthy, as opposed to patting you on the back and just saying, "Hey, look at Alexander. He's a great example of somebody who just pours it on all the time." I'll tell you that that first approach will get us better results with Alexander in the long term than just giving him a high five for putting in, 50 hours a week, 60 hours a week for months on end.
Yeah, there's definitely a need to, when working from home at least, to segregate your life. And I heard it said best this way, because yeah, there is a tendency that you can roll out of bed, walk over to your computer, and then work without looking at the clock. I heard the best thing to do is to manage your spaces. So if you have only a laptop, for example, make sure that you're using the laptop in a space that you consider to be dedicated for working. It could be, a couch, it could be another room, it could be a piece of the floor if you have a small place. But the idea is that that area is dedicated as your workspace. And then if you move to another area, even if you're using the same laptop or device, now that's considered to be playtime. Maybe you want to play games on your computer, or you want to look at videos or whatever you do, but you're in a different location so that you're framing your mind in a different way. And that kind of gives you balance, as well as being able to just to know, when to turn off the work ethic. You're not going to benefit anybody in the long term by working 12 hours a day. I mean, there's always moments of crunch time during, high deliverables and deadlines and stuff like that. But you're not doing yourself a service if you're going to just burn the candle at both ends.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I've heard, I guess, a long time ago that concept of context switching, and I'm pretty bad at it. So I'm going to give that one a shot in this coming week.
I hope it works for you. Let me know. Get back to me if it does. When working on a particular project, when you're allocating the team to a particular project, how much do you take the person's personal interests in the project into account? I think this has to do with burnout, in the sense of, if someone doesn't enjoy what they're doing it just because they're forced to do it. I don't think there's going to be some friction. There's going to be some resistance. I don't know if burnout will be the end result, but I think there's something to be said about making sure that the people who are on a particular project are actually enjoying what they do. How do you balance the person's interest versus the project's needs?
Yeah, that's an interesting topic. I think that as I've worked with people in the technical realm, there are so many pieces of technical work, right? Whether it's developing a new piece of software, or doing data analysis, or some kind of implementation or code writing. There are very few people who want to do the exact same thing day in and day out. And so it's always a challenge, but I think an important thing to do, to try and assign people to things that both meet the company or the client's objectives, and also satisfy that person from the depths of the type of project they're working on, the type of analysis that they're doing, and certainly working on projects where the end result is something that is really meaningful to them. Right? Very few people that I've worked with, and maybe it's because I've been fortunate to work with a lot of people serving nonprofit organizations, get the utmost satisfaction from their job by turning out a bunch of ones and zeros that send data from one system to another. Instead, I feel like a lot of what people are satisfied by, or their job satisfaction largely comes from, or in great part, from being able to work on a project where they can see the world getting better as a result. So does this CRM system we configure help an organization reach donors and raise more money? Does it help reach people who are in need of a social service? Those are the things that certainly become really important to the people on my teams. I think as far as the technical work that people do, it's a bit harder for sure. I think trying to put Lois on a project where she has the opportunity to do a bunch of analysis is great. But if we have to, switch her over to a project where she's writing some code and doing a lot of detailed QA work, and she doesn't like that, we need to be able to say, to your point, sometimes we need to do those hard things, right, that are uncomfortable because it's what the client needs and what the business needs. But I feel like as we're in conversation with someone like Lois and encourage her to work on another project where she gets to do more of that analysis, and give her those opportunities as we move into the future, that becomes really important. I would say one last thing about that, and that is I've seen some organizations and some companies really try too hard to mold a role around what someone is interested in doing or willing to do, I think that creates a lot of inefficiency, if you will, over time. And we end up trying to create roles to fit people rather than finding the right people to fit our roles. And so as leaders, it's a fine line, and it's a balance. Certainly, we can't just say we only want people who will do XYZ job, because that might work in the short term, but we're not going to develop people who are going to work with us and support our clients for the long term if they don't have better job satisfaction from that piece that comes from being really interested in both the type of work that you're doing and what the outcome is.
That's a really good point. And I agree with you that in the nonprofit space, a lot of people are motivated by the mission. That, how are we making the world a better place? And that seems to be a very strong motivation. And it's beyond just the ones and zeros, like you said. It's really about how can we improve the world in some small way. I'm curious to know also, because we talked about billing hours. I've noticed some agencies make sure that they allocate a certain percentage of the employee's time to self-improvement. So it's not just about how many hours can you work in a particular week, how many billable hours you can work in a particular week, but also, a certain percentage of improving yourself, whether it's certifications like you would do in Salesforce, or research, or personal hobbies that are, related but not necessarily directly related to the work that you do. How do you find about the balance between those two? The billable hours versus the self-improvement hours?
What I found over the years is that I have worked for companies that are much smaller than Google, right? We all know about this Google example where, I don't know if they still do it, but for some period of time, they would allow all of their workers, line workers, managers, programmers, executives, to take something like 20% of their time and invest it in frivolous, cool, interesting, brainstorming and concepting for new ideas. Unfortunately, I think the majority of small to mid-sized businesses that we work for today, they can't afford to do that. They have productivity targets, they have billing targets. They can't afford to give people 20% of their time to do something that may, or more likely may not, contribute to the bottom line. That said, I think that we need to look for those opportunities to offer people professional development. And so whether it's a training or working with a coach, or exploring new business ideas, we need to create that time. And it has to be, to your point, first, in this context, first and foremost, interesting to that individual. I think the two things that I would say that make that effective, in my experience, have been, one, making sure that, again, you're having that active conversation where we're talking about what Mike wants to do. Mike is saying he wants to go get a Salesforce certification so that he can really improve himself and build on his knowledge of, CRM systems and, server-side JavaScript programming and that sort of thing. But two, we need to be very clear that the objective that Mike gets that free time to go pursue a certification for has to contribute to the business's bottom line. I've managed a few people where we've offered them the use of a professional coach, and in working with that coach, one of the things that we discovered is that that individual or those individuals may actually be struggling at work because they have a lot of things going on in their personal life, whatever they may be. And I feel like in those cases, when we've identified that opportunity, we've said, okay, great, you can work with this coach, but the coach's responsibility is to help you be more effective at work and working with your teams. And so if you want to work with that coach to provide you with psychotherapy support and handle your, I say handle, but support your personal development, we need you to do that after hours, and you may need to pay that coach directly to do that work. I feel like those are the things that are really a good recipe for letting us take people who want to make work that much more personal and invest in cool, interesting development, be successful.
The next topic is something that's definitely become more publicly discussed, at least I've noticed in the last several years, and that's about diversity. I know it's a bit difficult for us to talk too much about diversity because we're both white males, but I think we both understand that there is an importance to having diversity, to talking about it, to seeing that there's a need for more diversity. And I'm curious to know, why do you think, just your own perspective, why do you think it is so important?
Yeah, wow, what a huge and important topic. I think you're right. Certainly, and I want to say this before I say anything else. As a white, wealthy, cisgender man who, by the grace of God, was able to attend fancy universities, I can't tell you what others want. I can't tell you what people of color, women, people who don't identify as gay or straight or anything else. I really can't pretend to describe what it is that they want and need. I would say that, you made this point when we were catching up last week, and that was it's important for this to be a two-way conversation. So this conversation between you and me would never pass the Bechdel test. Um, I think that it's really important for us to make sure that it's a two-way conversation. I think that was your point when we were catching up before, and that is that a lot of executives, particularly white executives, particularly male executives, see this issue of diversity come across their desk, and they really think that it is something that they don't need to take seriously because it's either something that the people of color or women on the team are complaining about, and they're a minority, and maybe we don't need to do anything about that, or that they just think that it's a frivolous pursuit. It's an activist pursuit of, the primarily white staff who want to, be super liberal in their politics and bring their politics to work. I think what I could say is that, we know from the natural world that the most diverse things, the most diverse teams, the most diverse natural processes create the most durable and strongest result. And so I think it's critical that we continue to have this conversation about how to make our technical teams more diverse. I would argue that if people like you and me don't invest that time in making that happen on the teams we work on in the companies that we work for, that it's highly unlikely that anything will get done in a substantial, durable way. And if we don't, there are other companies out there who will make those changes, make their teams diverse, come up with better solutions, and just outperform us over time. I think that's really how I feel about it at a high level. Does that make sense to you? How do you look at it?
I see it as I mean, the world is a beautiful place, and to look at it through a one single lens is limiting yourself. You're missing the beauty of the rest of the world. Having the diversity, having the team, and diversity doesn't necessarily need to be about gender or orientation. It could be also about accessibility. There's just so much diversity in the world naturally that if you just only have your team look through it through one lens, you're missing out on so much possibility. So what I can tell you, for example, small stories in user experience, because I also am certified in user experience. We always learn about making sure that the interface that's being built has a certain size of the fonts, for example, to make sure we track people who are able to or not able to read as well. It has a certain amount of contrast, some of the color choices for people who are colorblind. Like there's a lot of considerations that have to be involved in a user experience design that you might not think of initially, but they are an important part because there are certain, and even another example would be the grammar that you choose. What level of grammar do you choose? Because if you go too high in your level of grammar, you will lose some of your audience members. But there's generally more than just one lens that needs to be added here. There has to be that diversity, that input. Like you said also that making the team stronger by having multiple points of view. I always say that variety is a spice of life, and I truly believe that. I hate to eat the same food, for example, every single day, and that's a really bad example. But I enjoy different kinds of food as well, and there's so much of a richness to tap into the world that why limit yourself? It's more of a philosophical approach, but I think it's a really important one.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. And again, I can't pretend to be an expert on this topic. I think that as I've worked with teams, especially growing a business in the last 10 years, I think there are three key components. The first is we need to look at the people that are on our teams, right? We need to make sure that people are coming to us with those different backgrounds, right? However that is defined, and I can't define it here, but we need to be sure that we're not just headed towards having the same people with the same education from the same fancy universities on the team, because that will never get us the best possible result, right? There's a team over at IBM chock full of people from all over the world who can eat our lunch all day long when it's just, a few of us white guys on a team trying to come up with a solution. We need to press, obviously, our teams to go find those individuals. And I think that's something new for many human resource managers who've been in the business for 20, 30 years. I was working with a team in a rural part of our country, and the headquarters was in a rural area, and we were saying, look, we need to identify more people of color, more women, more people who come from non-traditional training backgrounds to join our team. And the head of HR said to me, well, that's not my problem. There aren't a lot of those people in this town. And I was just stunned that was the way that they were approaching how we might be able to find people from all over the country, if not all over the world, to support the work we're doing. Um, I would also say that building a culture that embraces and fosters good communication, tough communication sometimes when we're trying to come up with the best result. The best people won't come up with the best result if they're not encouraged to do so and welcome to challenge what people on the team are saying in a way that is constructive. And then I think your point is really a great one, and that is that we need to build the product so that the outcome of what we do respects the diversity of all of the people that we serve. And that, I think is often one of the most challenging things, but perhaps the most important thing as we go.
I'm curious to know your perspective on why this has become important only recently. And maybe this is more of a personal perspective view, but it's been in the public conversation more than ever before. But I'm curious in your perspective of why we didn't talk about this 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Why is it more relevant today than it was in the past?
I think that when I started working in technology 25 years ago, the vast majority of um, the technical leaders were more often than not men, white men, tall white men, people who had gone to a fancy, university, and people that really embodied this kind of ethos or this culture of, they're never wrong, and if you're wrong, you work, 70 hours next week to fix the mistake you made. And I think that was really reflective of the culture at the time. I think that we have been fortunate that more and more individuals have been asking for it. People want access to those top teams. But I would tell you that one of the biggest driving forces is that our customers are asking us for it. And so, in the space that is kind of described as nonprofit, progressive organizations, especially here in the US, as much as those have been my clients my whole life, they have been demanding it more and more because it is critical to them and critical to their culture. And I would tell you that, especially in this small space, right, because the technology world is miles wide. The reason why it is happening at the corporate level is only because customers have asked for it because it is critically important to them and their mission. And so I think to any of those nonprofit leaders out there who are working with software vendors, working with agencies, working with freelancers, right? The more the market demands it, the more we as leaders will have to address it. Um, I would say that's probably the biggest reason today that there have been changes in our space. Um, I used to work for a big agency. It's now a $1 billion company, and there were a bunch of cowboys, if you will, at the top. 5 executives. One of them was a woman, but the other four, they would go on all these crazy vacations and all of this stuff where they were just kind of running around like cowboys. But it wasn't uncommon at that company that even middle managers, if they were on a trip, if it were at least 90% men, they would go to a strip club for dinner and just, bill that as their corporate dinner, right? To me, that sounds so unbelievably bizarre. At the time, I just kind of wrinkled my brow at it and to be honest, I didn't do much. But God, if I saw that in a company today, one that I worked for, never mind, could observe, right? I would be compelled to act and say that that's not acceptable in a way that, to be perfectly honest, I may not have 15 or 20 years ago. I think those things are really critical as we look at, sure, our customers are demanding it, but the more that we as individuals, and certainly, again, as a white man, I feel responsible for making the culture that much better, can confront it and push it out of the way and make sure that we change our culture and do things to ensure that that kind of thing doesn't happen. I think that's another piece is that we really have asked individuals inside organizations to be more personally responsible when they see that kind of thing going on. Again, that's the strip club example is a little bit far away from the diversity topic, but quite frankly, if we can't create a culture where that kind of thing doesn't go on and that we actually, hold ourselves to a higher standard of creating a place where people are comfortable, don't feel intimidated, don't see that kind of men will be men behavior. It's the only way that we'll get to a place where we can bring great people to a great culture to get great results.
Yeah, I love the trend and I hope it continues. I'm looking to see how far we can get. So there's a related topic, and that's a bit about vulnerability. And this is the way that I interpret this topic is about personal vulnerability in the sense of, as an employee, being open to making mistakes, or at least being able to apologize for making certain mistakes and then recovering, doing what's needed to be done to fix the mistake. I'm curious to know, do you think that cultivating a culture of vulnerability is important, or should everyone just, not assume their mistakes and cover them up and just, deal with them without having to say, listen, I'm sorry, but I made a mistake.
Honestly, if I had one secret to why I've been successful in my life as a manager, and to describe it as successful might be a stretch. I think it really is that concept of vulnerability. A minute ago, I was just describing that when I started working in technology, the people who were the pinnacles of any technical organization were these, stony faced, executives who never made a mistake and didn't tolerate any mistakes and that kind of thing. And I feel like the piece that has allowed me to develop teams that perform and perform well for the long term is by me really trying to express that aspect of vulnerability in myself so that they would actually feel comfortable expressing it themselves and bringing that to bear at work. As an example, I think that I'm not the greatest engineer, right? My best coding days are well behind me at this point, and oftentimes, if I write a technical solution and I program some, CRM system or web technology, chances are that there's someone smarter than me in the organization who will find a mistake. And when that happens, I feel like, as an example, I can be vulnerable and say, hey Tim, thanks for finding that. You're absolutely right. I didn't run that through the right QA checks, or I wrote a shortcut and that created some error in the system. And really, I made that mistake. I think doing that as a leader and doing that often is something that allows us to give other people that permission to say, hey, I'm going to try something. I'm not sure if it's going to work. And they will volunteer those solutions way more often when they know that the leaders of the organization are also sharing that kind of vulnerability and acceptance for when they screw up. They jump in and fix something, but they're happy to admit that they screwed up, because no one is perfect all the time, even those stony-faced technology executives I described before. Um, One other example I think is, in my career, I've tried to be I've held a role that's like a solution architect or a sales architect or pre-sales consultant. Sales engineer is what we called them in 2001. And I'll just toot my own horn for a second here. I would often get comments that, oh, when we met with the client, you really connected with them and you had such great technical ideas. And what those people were missing was that the clients and I connected not because I came up with a great technical idea. Seldom were they impressed by the acronyms or the ones and zeros I wrote on the screen to, create some kind of computer code. But more often than not, they were able to trust me, and we could do great work together and close lots of business, because the way that I would talk to a client, and an individual who in more cases than not was not technical, was to listen to what they had to say, acknowledge what they were asking for, provide them with a little bit more information to inform their perspective so they felt smarter walking out of the room. But also saying, hey, I think this is how it's going to work. I've got to go back and double check and I'll get back to you tomorrow. But, I think we can solve this problem with ABC solution. I am 90% sure I'll come back with the other 10% in the next couple of days, or I'll come up with another solution. And that kind of vulnerability, where you're not standing up and saying, this is exactly how it's going to get fixed, and we know this from day one, builds a lot of trust. It builds a lot of trust with individuals, and it comes from vulnerability.
I really like the idea of risk, in the sense of encouraging employees to take risks, and they may not pay off. They might fail really poorly, but the idea of risk taking to me is very positive. Maybe measured risks is a better way to say it. Not any risk all the time, but the ability of pushing that boundary, right? Of getting out of your comfort zone, of doing something you're not quite familiar with. And then if it doesn't work, then you at least apologize for it. You roll back, you do what needs to be done to fix it. But the idea of feeling like that's a safe space, that I can take these challenges, I can take these risks, knowing that if it does fail, we can recover and we can roll back, and I won't get penalized for it. I think that's a really, really important element to this vulnerability. And I would say also, to your comment about not knowing the full answer, I have a good friend of mine who I find is a fantastic father. And when his young daughter asks questions that he doesn't know the answer to, he'll tell her that he doesn't know the answer to. So one scenario was, she asked, why is the sky blue? And rather than come up with some, half-ass answer right on the spot. He says, that's a really good question. Let me research that and get back to you. And he did his proper research, and he translated it so that an 8-year-old would understand. But that was, when he told me that story, I was like, that's an amazing thing to do. Instead of just making something up, sounding like you're smart, he actually took the time to figure it out and then give her that answer. So that approach too, I think is a great way to say, I got some great ideas. Let me just, validate them to be 100% sure, and we'll get back to you on that.
I love it. I love that example. I'm going to make sure I do more of that with my 12-year-old.
I heard the expression once, and I don't know if I'm saying it quite right, but that vulnerability can be a strength, or even is a strength. Have you ever heard an expression like that? And if so, what's your interpretation of that?
Yeah, I have heard that, and I think one of the great authors for people to check out, certainly if they haven't already, is this work of a woman named Brene Brown. She's done a ton of work on this notion of vulnerability over the last, probably over her whole career. If you just go to YouTube and look up Brene Brown, Brene, and her TED Talk, one of her first TED Talks really focuses on this topic and brought her onto the scene as somebody who thinks a lot about this and offers us a lot as leaders um, around how to use that vulnerability as a strength. I think in my career, as I've been a line worker and a manager and an executive, um, really building those relationships with individuals in the workplace comes from that vulnerability, that ability to say, I may not be right, to admit when we've made mistakes, to offer up that notion that I'm just as imperfect as everyone else, and we're creating a culture where we want to get the best possible result, but we're also willing to open ourselves up to put things on the table, to take those risks. Really, at the end of the day, that every ounce of vulnerability you put into an organization and a culture and a tech team will result in so much more strength. It just seems like some huge contradiction of terms here in our culture and our society, certainly here in the States, where weakness might actually result in something that is great. But I feel like if we can't do that, it's then we're creating companies that certainly I don't want to work for, and the best team members I've ever worked with and supervised certainly don't want to work for either.
Yeah, I agree. And I think this is actually might be a good place to end the podcast, because I have a feeling we could keep on talking.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
had talked a bit about all these different topics. There was more we could have talked about, but I think this is a pretty good place to end. What I would suggest is I would love to have you at one point back on the show. We can definitely talk about more stuff, but I think that's a good point to pause here.
That sounds great.
Peter, thank you so much for coming back for part 2. Where can people find more about you online and get to know you a bit better?
Yeah, I'd love to connect with people. My website is againseethestars.com. And certainly people can reach out to me at peter@againseethestars.com.
Peter, it's been great. Thank you again.
Thank you, Alexander. It's my pleasure.
All right, folks, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again next time for Agents of Nonprofit.